In this video, I will not only go through the recoil and spread patterns in Battlefield 2042 and how easy it is to control them, I'm going to drag out and expose the elephant in the room. DICE and TheCadWoman have been talking about a recoil bug in Battlefield 2042. What is it that they are talking about? Is it really a bug? Does it affect my gameplay? Does it ruin my game? These are all valid questions, and I'll address them later in this video. And I promise that after watching this, you will understand what it's all about and whether you should be worried or not. First, if you find this video useful at all, please throw in a lovely thumbs up and maybe even hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any future content like this. Ah yes, before we get started, I just want to mention that if you watched my live stream where I talked about this, well, I've made some further research since then, so this video does contain some adjustments and quite a few additions, especially regarding the bug. Why don't you stay a while and listen?
To be able to do this, I've done this previously in Battlefield 5 in a video. If you look at the edited version of this, you will probably see something, let's see, yeah, that in the right corner. How far away are we? 10 meters. Let's make it 20. There we go. And on my screen, my physical screen, I have a crosshair in the middle that shows exactly the, but you can't see that, can you? So I've made something for you as well. I'm going to activate it in OBS, and you see that's the dead spot middle. Or it should be, at least. I hope it is. Otherwise this would be a bit useless. But now you can actually see what I see on my screen. And if you didn't know it already, gaming screens do have some features to enable you to play while gaming. And I guess it's down because it's actual hardware. So if you play something like hardcore and you have no reticle, and that's the idea, because you're not supposed to hipfire with precision and so on, a screen like this will obviously be pretty much a cheat, and you can't discover it. It's I mean, because it's only what you see. You can't even see what I see on my screen, the physical screen. You can see what I see on what the computer generates, because that's a pass-through, so to say. But this is an overlay that the screen adds, and that's something completely different. And we could go into details in all that. Just write a comment if you want to know it, but I think most of you would be bored if I get into too much detail about how and what you can see and how my setup works. But yeah, just know I have my screen, I have activated now. I'm going to deactivate it later because I think it's annoying, because this game moves. I mean, let's say you're flying, for instance, then you actually move around the reticle a little bit. And in the early days, you actually had it offset a little bit on the Y-axis, which was pretty annoying. So, first of all, what is recoil? So recoil is when I fire and I don't touch the mouse, the weapon will start to climb a little bit. And it will not climb in a straight line for most weapons. It will climb in some direction. When it starts to climb, it will climb in a general direction. That is usually how Battlefield games work. And it can deviate a little bit, but it will mostly do that. So you can control it fairly well. And then you have the spread, which basically is how much on the side it goes. A little bit up and so on. But I mean... And in Battlefield games, this is typically random, but it's not like completely random. It has, every weapon has a probability, so to say, where the next bullet should land. And this is DICE's way to balance things, trying to make it, to equal it a little bit. Let's be real, DICE has been doing this for ages. I mean, back in 2007 when we played competitive Battlefield 2, that was the same discussion, but maybe not necessarily exactly about this, but about other things. The competitive scene, DICE is doing a game that they can use, but it's not for them. It's not optimized for them. DICE is not doing that. It's not optimized for... Did it turn red a little bit? Oh, look at that. And that is beautiful. I still think that's one of the best effects in the game. I think it's absolutely stunning. Good job, DICE. Yeah, but to get back to the point, so DICE tries to make a game that is somewhat casual, that pretty much anyone can play and have a good time. And that is the way that's been for pretty much always. And you should know it by now. Here, this is a good place. So 16 meters away. So I'm just going to push the button and we see what happens. And I'm not going to compensate or anything. I'm just going to push the button. And you see it start to climb. And that is actually pretty much a straight line up. And if we go a little bit here and we do the same, 16 meters, yeah. And it would look similar. Yeah. So, I mean, that is pretty much the same pattern. One goes here and one goes here. And it's actually... there's very few of the bullets that goes in the dead center. That's actually pretty interesting. So basically what it works like is that it has the recoil and it goes straight up in a straight line like this. And then the spread is working pretty much equal on both sides. And I think the GEV is a little bit strange here, but I mean, this is hip fire, so you're not supposed to be very consistent in hip firing here, right? Now we do the same thing with ads, like this. This is ads, right? And we start to fire, and now you see it's very much a narrow line. And we can do the exact same thing. And if you look at and compare these two, you see that the general pattern is pretty much the same. There is some deviations. It's not exactly the same pattern, but I mean, usually that's the thing with games. Even if you look at Counter-Strike, it has sort of different paths it can take. Especially if you look at the older Counter-Strike, there's a whole different story. And we got some rain. Brilliant. It's like real life. This is basically the same, both of them. And if you look with ads, obviously you get some concentrated fire. And if you look at hip fire, not so much, right? And if we look at this one, hip fire while moving. So it's not actually giving us any... It's not really helping us when you're just standing still with hip fire. If we just try to ads and we try to control this, now we mostly need to work with the recoil, because as you see, it's quite narrow. The GEV is it's a good weapon. And I'm just holding it, and you can control it. I mean, that was a bit so-so to be fair. I mean, that is pretty... You can't really complain about that, can you? I mean, the assault rifle is supposed to spread a little bit more compared to before. But, I mean, look at that. That's... Still, it's 16 meters. It's not that very far, is it? If we compare with the PF51, and you can see that I have different laser sights. So this actually improves the hipfire accuracy. Oh my goodness, it's very much over the place. And if you noticed, when it climbed up here, that's like a roof, the top that it actually can climb. But I mean, that spread is unbelievable. If we go with ads, and it climbs and then it maxes out. But I mean, this is quite narrow. And then we obviously hit like a mark, and then we start to spread a little bit more. We'll take a look at this, 60 meters, yes. And if we try to control this a little bit, just keeping the finger down. And I have to work a little bit more to control it. But this weapon is, on the other hand, a close combat weapon. So this is the GEV, and the GEV is pretty awesome. But I mean, so far we haven't really seen any deviation as such. What we can see, however, I might actually show it like this. So now the laser is almost where the reticle is, and I consider the laser itself more of a sort of fancy thing. And you see he relaxes a little bit and it goes down a little bit. And if I start to move to the right, it actually starts to move in front. And if I move to the left, it's the same thing. So let's have a look if the actual bullet is actually going for the reticle or if they're going for the laser. So I mean, the laser is all over the place. It really is. I guess you could say it's guiding a little bit. I mean, let's have a look at this. I've always considered the laser to be more of a like graphical gimmick, not a actual this is where the bullet land, because I just don't think it's just for the feeling. So let's have the RPT. So first of all, let's have a look at the hip fire. And again, once you get up here, and it's the same level as about the PF51, that is like a ceiling for how far the recoil can go. But on the other hand, if you're shooting up there, you're not really doing any good anyway. But the RPT is spreading a lot when you do hip fire. I think that's what you can expect with LMG. And if you go ads, and there you can actually see why the RPT is such a good weapon. I mean, look at this narrow. If we run over here and we have a look at the PF51, that spreads a bit more. And if we look at the GEV, it's still more spread. The RPT is amazing in that sense. So if I try to just control it a little bit... Oh, sorry. It's reload. But I mean, that's basically just going mouse down. Or if you are a controller, it's you just go tip it a little bit and you should be able to control it, because it's very consistent. And I mean, we could really make a hole over here. Look at that. To be standing with an LMG and be able to fire like that, that is a little bit... That is almost overpowered, isn't it? So, Ghoul Magnum, hip fire. You see, it starts with the same, but it doesn't hit that same place. And that is a balancing thing, yes. I mean, you're not supposed to go around and play hip fire with Ghoul Magnum, right? That's not really the thing. If we do move a little bit and we go ads like this, I see it's just straight on. There's a little bit movement because I wasn't holding my breath. Now I'm holding my breath. And you see the difference, right? If we go just with a BFP a little bit. So hip, I mean, it's some real kick in that gun, isn't it? That's the second bullet, and I mean, it's real climbs. And if we go with ads, so the main difference if you go with ads is actually that it doesn't climb very much. It have similar spread, I would say, but it doesn't climb that much at all. It's about half the height, but it's not really a weapon that you can just fire away in that perspective. You probably want to let it rest a little bit.
It's finally time. Let's talk about the recoil bug. First of all, let's clear out if it's actually a bug at all. It could just have been one of the wonkiness that DICE throws in to make the game more balanced, or perhaps to increase the immersion, right? Well, who can say for sure, but at least Enders claims to have been talking to DICE devs, actually quite some time ago, and he claims that they confirmed it to be a bug. I see no real reason for Enders to lie about this, so it's probably correct. In addition, when TheCadWoman together with her community did try things quite a bit more, it turned out to affect different players differently. This is also partly why I couldn't reproduce it at first. All this of course points towards actually being a bug. Why haven't DICE fixed the bug? That we will come back to later. So it is a bug, but what is it? In short, when you fire some weapons and the recoil starts to kick in, the actual aim of the weapon separates from the center of the screen. This is quite odd, frankly. In addition, if you do sudden movements, primarily vertically, the aim lags behind a bit, and I guess this is why Enders and other players with exceptional tracking became aware of the issue. Normal players tends to pause when shifting target, not least vertically. In Battlefield, however, as shown before in this video, the recoil is very manageable, which allows to just keep that trigger finger pressed while changing targets. If you do that, especially vertically, and it lags behind, It creates a very odd feeling, and you might even over-adjust because it seems you didn't do enough initially. Looking at the arrows on the screen now, you can see that the purple cross shows the center of the screen and the red dot climbs way above. And in this example, you can see when I quickly change aim vertically down, it takes a while to catch up. This affects a bunch of weapons, but exactly which seems to be more player dependent than a general rule of the game. Attachments can enforce the effect to some extent, but it's not only down to that. TheCadWoman pointed out that for everyone, the avancee seems to misbehave. So when I revisited the subject, that's the weapon I used, and sure enough, it makes it quite clear. At the same time, the GUI seems to not suffer from it at all. Now we know this is a bug, and we know how it behaves. So is it an issue? Well, it doesn't really affect anything when you manage the recoil. It seems it kicks in after the recoil has been climbing a bit, or when doing swift change of target. The thing is, all deviations like this will be very noticeable for a player with very good aim and tracking. In its essence, the precision is the difference between these players and, quote, normal players. I'm not saying that anyone is bad here, but when a player has that great precision that it pretty much looks like an aimbot. I mean, it's pretty obvious that they will feel any oddities happening more than someone that always does 2 or 3 big adjustments to the aim anyway. So if you aim like a machine, and you quickly change targets while keeping firing, especially vertically, you are likely to suffer a bit from this bug. Any such feeling can actually ruin the gameplay. At least I have a hard time to play, if for instance stuttering, lag, displacement or anything like that happens. Even if just once or twice, it sort of gets to my head, and I start to question everything. And suddenly I spend a few MS more aiming before I fire, or I overcompensate, or take unnecessary margins that in the end result in unnecessary deaths or losses. However, for most players, I don't think this affects too much. If it would, then I think more would have complained about it by now, because it doesn't matter while controlling the recoil at a single target, and pretty much doesn't affect anything while switching targets horizontally. Well, I just don't think it's such a big deal for most players. In addition to what I've already said, most players prefer to switch targets horizontally instead of vertically, because it's just easier for most. Without getting into too much detail, changing one axis is easier, and the technique used to handling the mouse benefits horizontal changes for most. That is also one of many reasons why mouse pads generally are wider, rather than taller. In modern softwares, there are always known bugs. If there are no known bugs, then the software isn't very complex, and if it's that simple, it doesn't do much fun. This is actually an important lesson, because the mindset that there should be no bugs is something that we need to get rid of. There simply isn't enough time to fix everything. However, that doesn't mean that we have to nor should accept bugs that are vital. How vital is a bug? Normally that is determined by the number of affected users and to what degree it affects the user. For instance, if a door would have slightly wrong colour, that can affect all players yet not be very urgent because the degree isn't that bad. It's horrible for the designer, but unless it's really wrong or blends into something else, most players probably won't even notice. However, if there is a bug preventing some players from even starting the game, it can be crucial, even if the number of affected players are less than 1. Usually there is someone, a person or a function, that determines the urgency of the bug. Depending on the structure, this may happen before or after, but at some point, someone will most likely give a moment to consider the complexity of the bug. Is it possible to isolate to a certain code segment? And in turn, is that code segment very complex? Can it affect other things? If an effort is made to fix this, sometimes it's pretty obvious what needs to be done to fix a bug. But the fix itself would change so many things that it isn't worth it. Or maybe there is just a clear risk of causing other issues. All this boils down to how the bug should be prioritized compared to everything else that is going on. Are the bugs or changes or new features? Even with hundreds of developers, time is limited, which is why pretty much all workflows include some way of prioritizing what needs to be done. Working as a developer is not only about doing things, it's about doing the right thing to benefit as much as possible. So do I defend DICE for not having fixed this bug yet. It seems to have been around for quite some time. I suppose that you could say that to some degree, but above all, I wanted to bring some light into the process of bug handling in a modern software company. Try to point a few fingers to explain perhaps why it's not fixed yet. But what you also need to understand is that at some point, the handling of a bug comes down to human opinions. There can be data for how many are affected, and there can be methods to point out the severity for those that are affected. But in the end, there is at least one person that must consider this bug important enough to spend time on it. Also, even as time is spent, it may not lead to the bug being resolved. It might just lead to the conclusion that it was more complex than anticipated, or maybe the error wasn't found at all. Again, not all bugs are fixed, It's easy to get stuck in the mindset of trying to fix a bug until it's fixed. But if you, as a developer, spend big chunks of time into a black hole while your manager, director, scrum master, project leader, product owner, or whatever structure you use breathes down your neck, well, eventually you just have to shift focus into something more productive. Anyhow, I think I've spent far too much time on this subject, so it's probably about time to close shop for the day. Hopefully this did help you in how you can control and manage recoil and spread in Battlefield 2042, and I'm sure it can help you have a good time in the game. After all, that is what it's all about. Cheers!